What I'm finding difficult to understand is that when a bill passes through the House of Commons unamended, you then change your approach completely. You don't tell the Commons that you're changing your approach. You don't have the courtesy to come before this committee. And then you come back to the Commons, it having gone through the Lords, presenting the Commons effectively with a fait accompli. Don't you think that's disrespectful of the House of Commons?
Our job is to deliver for the people of this country. And what the people of the country want is reform that makes their lives better. It is not my job just to do what any predecessor does. It is my job to look through legislation, make sure it is working and make sure it delivers for the people. And that is what I have done.
Secretary of State, the bill completed its passage through the Commons in January, and it was unamended. As you've acknowledged, the thrust of the bill, the method of identifying that element of EU law that should be removed, should be revoked, did a 180-degree turn when it arrived in the Lords. You've explained that you decided on a change of approach. When did you decide to make those amendments in the Lords?
I think that this would have been sometime, I'm sorry I don't have exact dates, it would have been sometime in March, because it would have been about a month, I would say 6 weeks of looking at everything that had been taking place. And also speaking with the Lords Minister, who gave me his view of how things were looking and what kinds of amendments the Lords would likely pass, looking at some of the correspondence we'd had from all sorts of stakeholders about what they thought. I just didn't think that we were going to end up delivering what we said we were going to be delivering. And you have to remember, the way I think about these things is probably different from lawyers. I'm not a lawyer, I'm an engineer. I think it is very easy to write things down and pretend that after we've legislated, everything is just going to work as it's been written. In practice, that often does not happen. So my view is that you look at what is happening rather than just not just what has been written down. And what I saw was a process which was doing the opposite of what it was intended to do. The retained EU law bill became a process of retaining EU law. That is not what we wanted. And so I don't agree that it's a 180-degree turn. I think it's a change in the process. We could have a debate about that, but my view is that what we want to do is get rid of laws that we don't need, and there is a process for that. It is not the bonfire of regulations. We are not arsonists. I'm certainly not an arsonist. I'm a conservative. I don't think a bonfire of regulations is what we wanted. What we wanted was reform and removal of things that we did not need. And this change in process, which I think is still a technical change, is what is going to deliver that. And it's already creating a lot of the impetus, a lot of the momentum, which in terms of showing people what has happened so far. Until I did this, no one knew what was happening. No one knew what was being revoked or reformed. And we could end up in a situation where we're telling ourselves that there's a big bonfire of regulations, and no one would have known what would happen until after the sunset, and then people saw that some things were still there, which we thought we'd repealed. And I was not going to let that happen on my watch.
But isn't it the case that a bonfire of unnecessary regulations is precisely what the Commons voted for?
I don't think so. And I think sometimes what we voted for was getting rid of regulation that we don't need.
Yes.
And that's what is happening.
Yes, but to that extent, what the Commons voted for was a bonfire of unnecessary regulations, to get rid of all those unnecessary regulations. You made the decision to change the approach fairly shortly after you were appointed to your present position.
Well, that's because I don't have control over the timetable. I had to make a quick decision, and I will continue to emphasize this was my decision, and it took a lot of convincing to get the Prime Minister to come on board. But the schedule has been voted in. My new approach has also been voted in by the Commons and the Lords as well. So it has more support than the original status of the bill.
You say that you took the advice of your Lord's Minister. Was he concerned that the bill would get a rough ride in the Lords?
I think we're always concerned about bills getting a rough ride in the Lords. Our concern was about the intention of the bill and the outcome being the same, rather than getting a bill through and congratulating ourselves on passing legislation, and then the legislation doesn't work. It has to work, and that is what I'm focused on.
But the attitude of the Lords was a concern of your Lords Minister.
The attitude of the Lords is always a concern, because the Lords can amend a bill, they can take time, they can slow it down, and given that we have a sunset of 2023, that's just 6 months from now. The bill has not yet received royal assent. There are powers that need to be used in a few months. I think stopping the bill from passing is actually a concern that is very real. We could have ended up in a situation where it was going to ping pong. The length of time would have meant that we wouldn't be able to use the powers at all. And then what would have been the point of that? So we may have an agreement or disagreement about the status of the Lords. I don't think that what we have seen so far in terms of amendments accepted and changes that we've made shows that we're doing anything other than having respect for both houses. Like I said, the schedule was my idea. No one had talked about a schedule. The schedule was my idea, which I felt would help, not just with the smooth passage of the Lords. We're not giving way to many of the amendments which have been put there, but also to deliver the intention of the bill. We would not have even ended up with a bonfire of regulations, as you say, which I don't think would have been right anyway. People need to see what it is we're doing. They need to have clarity or transparency. We would have had an elongated retained EU law process, and that's not what people voted for.
But you've actually departed completely from the approach of your predecessor, haven't you?
I don't think I have departed completely. We're still ending interpretive effects by 2023. But this was a bill that was brought in September under a different Prime Minister and a predecessor who was there for 44 days. I spent a lot longer than that looking at the bill, and I did what I thought was the right thing to do in order to make sure that the bill passed but delivered on its intentions. That is my job as Secretary of State. My job as Secretary of State is not just to do what my predecessor did. It is to do the right thing, and that's what I was doing.
But of course the bill met with the complete approbation of the House of Commons, didn't it, in its original form?
No, well, I don't think so, because the House of Commons...
It was unamended,
the House of Commons has voted on, in support of the amendments. So that is the status.
No, let's go back before it goes to the Lords. The bill went through the House of Commons unamended, didn't it?
Are you suggesting that we should not make any changes to
which I'd
any?
Be grateful if you would answer.
I just answered it, but I don't understand whether you're asking why any change should be made to any bill at all. Is that the question you're asking?
What I'm finding difficult to understand is that when a bill passes through the House of Commons unamended, and therefore clearly has the complete approbation of the House of Commons, you then change your approach completely. You don't tell the Commons that you're changing your approach. You don't have the courtesy to come before this committee so that this committee can scrutinise the changes that you're proposing. And then you come back to the Commons, it having gone through the Lords, presenting the Commons effectively with a fait accompli. Don't you think that's disrespectful of the House of Commons?
Well, first of all, I would dispute several of the things that you have said. This was a Lords amendment, so the change we would have had to make would always have been in the Lords. We rarely, if ever, give statements on changes in the Lords. Like I said, I don't believe this is a policy change. We are still delivering the bill's intent. Secondly, the first time I was asked to attend this committee, I'd just been appointed. I didn't know anything about the bill. What would have been the point of me coming here to say, I don't know, I'm not sure yet? I wanted to make sure that I understood what I would be talking about before I sat in front of the committee. And at each time I was asked, 2 or 3 times I said I would come in front of the committee as soon as we could find a mutually convenient time. You know that as International Trade Secretary, I'm often not in the country, so of course that made things difficult. But also, something you're not saying is that we had private meetings, David. We had private meetings where we discussed this extensively because I knew you had concerns. And it's public knowledge that we had private meetings because when I thought I was having private and confidential meetings, I was reading the contents in the Daily Telegraph. So with respect, I would like to dispute quite a lot of what you have said. But secondly, you are saying that the Commons voted for this without any dispute and the Lords changed it. This is parliamentary process. This is not the Lords who changed it, but the Lords did support the change that I made to the schedule. And the reason why I made the change to the schedule is because I could see that the intent of the bill was not what was happening. What is the point of us as MPs voting through legislation which is not doing what we want it to do, just so we can say, well, we passed this legislation? Our job is to deliver for the people of this country. And what the people of the country want is reform that makes their lives better, not just saying we've deleted things from the statute book. That is my approach. I think I have done the right thing. It is not my job just to do what any predecessor does. It is my job to look through legislation, make sure it is working, and make sure it delivers for the people. And that is what I have done. And the Commons voted in support of it. The Commons could have voted against the schedule. It did not.
You were clearly concerned about the reception this bill would have in the Lords. Did you ever give consideration to invoking the Parliament Act?
I did.
And what was your decision?
The process for invoking the Parliament Act would have been longer than the date of the sunset of the schedule. So it would have been a complete waste of time. That's the first issue. The second issue is that even letting the Parliament Act process go through, let's assume we could have done it in 2 weeks, would not have changed the material problem, which was that the bill was not functioning as intended, given the amount of effort that needed to be made in terms of retaining laws, whether we wanted to reform them or whether we wanted to keep them, the SI process that was being drafted, the amount of lawyers we would have needed. I just don't think it's an efficient way of delivering the outcome that we want.
As the chairman has remarked, the contents of the schedule consist of measures that are largely junk. That's right, isn't it?
Well, I think we should get rid of junk from this statute.
Absolutely. Well, in fact, you've got 1,400 pieces of junk that were found in the National Archives. Why didn't you get rid of those?
I think those have all gone already, haven't they? That was my understanding. So
don't you know?
one of the things that's interesting about the process is that the retained EU law revocation is happening in parallel with other bits of repeal and revocation. So we've already removed, I think it's about 900, nearly 1,000 pieces of rule, which departments just did without waiting for this. We left the EU a while ago. People did not wait for the rule bill to start removing regulations, but also there are bills like the Digital Markets Bill or the Financial Services Markets Bill, which are also revoking legislation. So some of the revocation and reform we're doing is in other bills. What this is doing is showing the public what we are effectively revoking now. This would still be what we revoked at the end of the year. This list you're seeing is what you would have got in your bonfire. What I have done is make it very clear what is happening so that all of the things that people think should be on there, bendy bananas, from one extreme to emissions trading scheme, somebody suggested that should go. I think that's a much bigger project which the Parliament should debate. That's not an SI level type of revocation. Everyone can see what is not going, and then we can have a programme for reform, which is what we're doing.
The most frequently cited reason for revocation given in your explanation of the schedule relate to inoperability, redundancy and irrelevance. Couldn't you have used the deficiencies power in Section 8 of the EU Withdrawal Act to remove that beforehand?
Well, I think one of the
50% of the contents of the schedule.
The contents of the schedule are decided by other secretaries of state. I can't tell DEFRA or DFT which policies they should remove.
I appreciate that.
Pardon?
The point I'm making is that there is a power, isn't there, under Section 8 of the EU Withdrawal Act to remove redundant pieces of legislation. Why has that not been used across the board in order to get rid of legislation such as this?
I think it's one of many powers that exist. So I think departments have some powers that they can use. But again, let's go back.
But why wasn't it used in this case?
So my understanding is that power expired at the end of 2022.
Really?
That's what I've been told. So we can't use an expired power.
Well, but what you've just indicated that officials have been working on redundant pieces of REUL for some considerable time.
In other departments, but I can't use a power that extended before I took on the job, which is the question you asked.
Yes, but why wasn't it already used? That's the question I'm asking.
I think that's probably a question for my predecessor who you've referred to before.
Okay. Thank you.